I think what we have here is, beginning with Jim's presentation that focused really on persuasive storytelling and keeping in mind, who the audience is, who are we targeting when we tell the story, and then telling it in a really effective way. And then on to Aaron and his presentation on, again, the authenticity and differentiating, your message, which in some ways, oh, okay, sorry. Persuasive storytelling, there it is. Persuasive storytelling is really, about telling the truth and being authentic in some ways. So, I see some connections there. And then on to Anne's, which gave a specific kind of situation in which stories were being differentiated, where we had different, there was a particular audience for the story that was being told, and that was speaking to the shoreline management plan, but with very, very different voices. And how do we bring those together? And more importantly, how do we include voices that are missing? How do we seek those out? How do we include them? And how do we get people to actively participate? So, I have, just a few minutes before I turn it over to you, because I know you're all out here, so you can interact with the panel as well. So, we are an urban serving university here, and with a particular mission of helping to close some of those gaps, to be a convener. And so I'd just like for each of you to speak a little bit to how you see the university situated, so that it can help to bring some of those missing voices to the table, and help to make certain that the narrative is one that is authentic and covers all the bases. So, have any ideas about that?
Don't look at me. Well, and you know a lot more about the University of Washington, Tacoma than I do, but I would just say, I know so little about Tacoma. I didn't know if you folks call yourselves Tacomans or Tacomites. So it's really been a real treat to come here and to be, especially to walk from the Hotel Murano down to this building and to see the dramatic way in which the physical landscape of this part of the city has been transformed over, I don't know how long, over the recent past, with all the adaptive reuse of particular buildings, with the clever insertion of some new buildings. The quality of architecture and urban design is really very high. So, when I think about that in terms of the kind of stuff I write about, I think, okay, what that means is that some narrative drove that. I don't know what the narrative is, but I'd love to read about it. And the transformation itself creates new narratives, new stories that could not possibly be told had the physical transformation not taken place. And it alters who can actually interact with whom. I don't know who was down here before the UWT set up this campus, but I know the population is very different now than it was then. So that means there's all sorts of new interactions that can take place and are taking place. So that's a key thing, I would think.
Absolutely.
Well, I would say that I would almost put it right back to you, Linda, which is I think one of the roles that the university plays is what we're doing right now, and trying to convene people around a set of conversations that, given expertise and exposure that we have in our scholarship and our work, and I say that I want to put it back to Linda because it was really Linda Isham's forum on the Urban University in 2011 that created a resonance for the very idea, so that when Deborah Friedman came and interviewed and said that she wanted to be the leader of an urban university, people knew what that was because Linda Isham knew to frame a forum around it and to bring the right people onto this campus and invite community members in to talk about it. So I think you do what universities help to do in creating the narrative.
Can I spin off that very briefly? The very fact that this forum is being held, and it's being held in this space, in this renovated building, exemplifies the point I was trying to make. So bravo to you for having stimulated this kind of activity.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I was there's one role that the university maybe has an easier time playing, and it, again, a little bit, I think this has a good example of it is, you know, universities, academia is devoted to free inquiry, and so the idea of bringing in people from elsewhere who can bring perspectives, but more importantly, potentially challenge your thinking, I think is very important. You know, so Jim and I are going to go home after today. And so, you know, we don't have to try to navigate some power structure here to get something done. So you can get, in effect, a little bit of people who can speak their mind without kind of having to worry about whose toes they're stepping on, you know, too much. Obviously, we don't want to embarrass our host too badly. But I think there is some of that. How do we bring in people who are willing to? I think a lot of the conventional wisdom comes because there's consultants and people who will come in and will simply not appropriately challenge the thinking where it needs to be.
All right, and could I spin off of that a little bit? You know, some of you know I'm an elected official in Iowa City. I'm a member of the city council there. I also taught at the University of Iowa for 25 years. So, and the university's embedded in the city. So I have a very good understanding of both the university and the city. And one thing I'm very conscious of is that in our city, we have lots of public participation, formal public participation with regard to city initiatives or city actions. So that's a good thing. But what we don't have is the kind of easy, informal public forums like this where there's really kind of more free-thinking discussion about possibilities, about the way people are thinking about the place in general, about how the city relates to the university in particular. And I think that's a real missing element for us. So we have an urban planning department, School of Urban and Regional Planning. I know the director very, very well, but they haven't initiated programs that would facilitate this kind of forum. And I'm going to go back and tell Chuck, we really ought to be doing that.
You know, but as I look out at the audience, I mean, I love the forum because it brings many different voices to the table, and we have these discussions annually. But as I look out, there are missing voices, you know, and so when we're talking about being inclusive, especially if we're talking about crafting a narrative for the city, we need to have, you know, the full complement of the city, not simply, I mean, for the most part, downtown interest represented. And so ideas about ways of bringing those people into this space with us, or somehow capturing that voice, those stories, so that they get considered in however we craft our future.
I think also, I'm going to point back to you again, Linda Isham, because I think sometimes this space is not the place to bring everybody and have the conversation, and it's often the kind of work that you do so beautifully in going out with classes into the community and engaging folks who might not be happy at a panel discussion. And so maybe that's also part of the role of the university is finding ways to connect in a myriad of different practices.
Well, as I say, I want to be careful. I want to challenge a little bit the notion that you have to have this maximally inclusive process to come up with one vision. I think one reason you come up with videos like we showed is because they kind of talk to everybody, and they came up with the least common denominator consensus you can build. And so I think you want to be able to have people have their say, but you also want to be able to have some, you know, leadership in the community who has an ability to put a stake in the ground on some things, and maybe even make some stands that are unpopular. And generally, in order for that to happen, it's got to be an elected official like a mayor who has democratic legitimacy. The other thing is when you bring everybody into one process, you're a little anti-resilient because everybody's coming up with one answer. In Indianapolis, there's kind of two groups of tech people. There's kind of the official state-run corporate muckety-mucks with their venture funds and their all their strategic marketing groups and this and that. And they're doing one thing. And then there's kind of this more grassroots people who are trying to do more bootstrap startups and different things. And they disagree about a lot of things. But it's actually good that you got two different groups of people with two different strategies, because more likely one or both of them is going to hit. So you don't want to just have, I think having diverse people doing diverse things that aren't necessarily trying to completely integrate them is actually a positive.
Well,
And then
one of the things I tried to say at the end of my talk was about the importance of interaction between the teller and the recipients. I think that's really crucial. It's one thing to produce a story, to craft a story that you think will be persuasive. We might call that a sales job or marketing or whatever. It's another to tell a story to another person and have that other person absorb it, take it in, try to make sense out of it in terms of that other person's life, and then maybe tell a different version of exactly the same set of events. And then when you're in that kind of situation, then you can begin to get a handle on how the two of you, the teller and recipient, actually think, what kind of shared story you have that makes sense for both of you, and then try to extrapolate to a larger group of people, 300 in the audience, 200,000 in Tacoma, etc.
I'd like to open to questions now, and our runners with the mics are ready. This one in the center in the yellow shirt.
Fine. Take a look around the room. How many people in this room know 20 people who are also in the room? Raise your hands. Okay? That's what this community is about. Collaboration, cooperation. 2008 was the best thing that ever happened to our city, and that's the recession, because it forced us to work together. It forced the city to change their leadership, it forced the campus to change their leadership, and it forced us to work with other nonprofits to bring things to this town. We've worked with the Hillside Development Group, the new Tacoma neighborhood, the development department, the new mayor, the new city manager, and we put a vision together with the sub-area plan, with the downtown plan, with the link extension, with the Amtrak. How many here have served on 3 or more committees within the last 5 years? Raise your hand. Okay? What we need is what the first speaker said. We need to keep that vision and continue to communicate and grow. The campus has taken up the banner of taking our urban planning out to the community, has taken our sociology classes out in the community, our physician's assistance programs out in the community. We need to keep this going. We need to keep talking. We need to keep Allie promoting these lectures. That's why we designed this hall, is to put people together. That's why the TLB has a large space in the middle of it, to keep these discussions going and solve problems. How do we keep the ball rolling and keep moving forward? That's my question. Thank you.
I want to just kind of expound upon something that I ran way out of time with my talk on, which is I think part of how that keeps going is also finding places for smaller conversations. I mentioned this distinction between inclusion and participation, and I'm referring to some work of a colleague of mine in planning, Kathy Quick, who won an award a couple years ago for a paper where she articulated, I think, what a lot of people know experientially, and is that it's great to come into a venue where you can kind of offer a one-liner or listen to what other people are saying, but that form of participation is much less productive and satisfying than the kind of intersubjective rationality or the kind of shared meaning making that can happen in smaller venues. And so I think that move towards smaller groups that are able to really deliberate around these very complicated issues is, in my view, one of the next steps that's necessary.
Pick up on something that Ken Greenberg said in his talk having to do with building on successes. I think of all this as kind of an incremental process. So step by step, you have a choice. You can move in a positive direction, a good direction, or you can move in a negative direction. You can let buildings deteriorate in a neighborhood, or you can make sure that buildings get renovated in a neighborhood. You can build on each success, such as the campus down here, and expand from it. But it's all an incremental process along the way.
I think what you highlighted is a great thing about smaller places, that you actually know a lot of people and there's very tight connections and dense social networks. That can also, if you're not careful, turn into a weakness, in that you end up talking with kind of the same people. Sean Safford did his doctoral dissertation. It was called Why the Garden Club Couldn't Save Youngstown. And he contrasted Youngstown, Ohio with Allentown, Pennsylvania, two steel towns that took a beating. And Allentown fared much better. And one reason was he mapped out the social networks of the community and found out that institutions like the Garden Club only reinforced existing social networks. Whereas in Allentown, they tended to bring together disparate social group networks that would otherwise not participate. Similar work out of BYU, there was some research around performance of groups, small groups going up if there's at least one socially distinct newcomer. One thing I've found is that in most cities where there's been a lot of dynamism and forward progress, there has generally been, chicken or egg issue, a critical mass of outsiders who were not originally from that community, because they see things for what they are, right? It's not like they were steeped in it from birth. So they have a kind of a perspective they can question. They're not bought into the status quo or the arguments and things that happened 20 years ago. So I would say to keep progress going is to make sure that you're attracting and integrating and socially acclimating newcomers into the city, into the process. I don't think you in a place like Tacoma, you necessarily want to become all outsiders, like a place like Denver where nobody's from there. Or a lot of these Sunbelt cities, nobody's from there. The question they ask, in Cincinnati, the question they ask is, where did you go to high school? Because the assumption is you lived there and went to school. It tells you everything about Cincinnati. And in Charlotte, they ask you, where from up north are you? And so it's a very different dynamic. So I think having a healthy balance where it's still a rooted place-based community, but where newcomers can come in, socially acclimate and contribute, it breaks up the calcification. Because you don't want excessive social capital can actually be a negative.
I don't want to hog the mic here, but she's holding on. She's not letting me have the microphone.
She's been instructed.
Just something I was thinking about near the end of your presentation, and that is the role of money. And obviously it takes money to redevelop, to build, to get momentum and all of that. But I think about money in politics now, and I think about money in sports teams that have been in a particular place for years and years and years, and cities get into competition about grabbing that team. We lost a couple of icons, in my opinion. The Russell Company going to Seattle still breaks my heart. Dale Chihuly setting up his main museum in Seattle, still, I can't use the word, fizzes me up. How's that? Or fizzes me off, something like that. So with the money we have, how do we retain, or do we just start getting that into our mindset that we're never going to be able to do it all with money?
Well, I think money is important. Money is clearly important. And the question I ask is, how did you get your money in the first place? And so I think that there's really no shortcut, in a sense, to building that type of thing. You need people to start and grow businesses here, and that builds wealth over time. Because if you're not replacing, right, if you're not replacing that, the old companies that maybe grew up and got sold and got bought that were infusions of capital, then effectively you're just spending on the capital. So you basically, I don't think, in general, tidal waves of capital wash over communities that aren't somewhat already successful. So I think creating a place where people can start and scale businesses locally is important over the long term to generate capital within the community.
Or do we want to, brand ourselves as many other areas have to try to attract the creative class, for example, or something like that? Or is there some balance that is met where we're serving the incumbent population and also doing things to attract newcomers, both business and residents?
I have one other thought on that too, and I'll try to be really brief, which is that there are things that we do as a city that all cities do that are considered kind of inviolable for thinking about like whether that's good money spent, right? It's become so entrenched as the way that things are done, and I think some forms of economic development certainly fall into that category. So when we look at the resources that it takes to involve children in urban design, for instance, with Linda and Josh Jorgensen and I are writing a paper about whether there's potential in Tacoma to have a community of practice around children as urban placemakers. It's expensive and it's really resource intensive, and so the kind of knee-jerk response would be, it's not reasonable. But when you look at, you spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a certain version of economic development, and then in one fell swoop, because a glass artist decides he wants another, phantasmagorical, exciting place in the shadow of the Space Needle, there's tremendous vulnerability. So, like, where your money is well spent, I think deserves maybe deeper reflection around the things that we take for granted as being absolutely essential and things that are absolutely too expensive to think about.
The question makes me think about candidate forums when you're seeking elected office. So in my town, that question would be rephrased something like this: do you support tax increment financing? And it's sort of a litmus test kind of question. So my own personal answer to that question is something like this. Under certain circumstances, I do. Under most, I don't. What I would prefer to see is public funds dispersed much more broadly in smaller increments than in single large projects that presumably are going to attract new people to the downtown or something like that. But I think one has to exercise a lot of discretion about that. You got to exercise some judgment. When should public money be invested in particular projects? When should it be avoided, and why? So in this case, investing in the UWT campus, a good idea. And I can think of some other situations where it is a very bad idea.
Hi. I want to go back to the narrative and since we're kind of focused on that, and it's such a filmmaking term. I'm a producer and a director and a filmmaker, and the reason when we saw the Sleeping Pill video versus the Portlandia video is that you're looking at a screenwriter and a filmmaker who knows how to get to the point in a clear, concise way. So do you think that it would be maybe wise, I'm not asking for myself, but there are quite a few films so that somebody can script something that is very clever, perhaps uses humor, and combines the story in a way that we all find compelling and that we are proud to put out there. I think we have to maybe utilize all of our artistic voices and our urban studies voices and our architectural artistic vision and combine all of it. But I do think filmmaking could be a really wise component to this.
We don't want to have a sleeping pill video.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I guess at some risk, I'll quote Machiavelli, who said, "Good advice always arises from the wisdom of the prince, not the wisdom of the prince from good advice." This is an axiom that's rarely failed. A prince who is not already wise himself will never take good advice. And so I think there is some of the bringing in the expertise from outside, but you also have to have, right, I think, what's probably one of the things with Ken's great successes, one of them is probably Ken. The other one's probably having a good client to partner with. So you got to be a good client. You got to have a good client in order to have a good consultant. So I think there is part of that, but part of it is how do we become more wise on the client side of the equation is maybe as important, because I suspect that professional and competent people produced. My guess is the Lincoln one was a highly competent branding firm that produced that work, but you have to have the client side as well. But I do think the professionals are incredibly needed.
Oh, I'd say yes. Bring filmmakers and screenwriters into the process, absolutely. And it makes me think of my colleague Leonie Sandercock, who Ann mentioned in her talk. Leonie was a screenwriter when she lived in Los Angeles and was teaching part-time at UCLA, and is also a very accomplished scholar in the urban planning world. So she exemplifies what can be done from that point of view, which leads me to make a larger point. Bring the humanities in. I think there are all sorts of people who have enormous skill that could be brought to bear on this, and yet somehow are either marginalized or think that their work is irrelevant to this kind of practical stuff, and so on. And in some cases, of course, they don't want to pay any attention whatsoever to the kind of practical issues we address. And I know a ton of them in Iowa City, the home of the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, which is very successful, and I admire it a lot, but they don't pay attention. So yes, bring them in. And I think of a couple other things. The Wheeling video, I thought the key word there was more. That video just goes on and on and on and on, and it repeats the more thing. We got more of this, we got more of that, we got that.
I didn't even play the whole thing.
I know, I watched the thing after you sent me the link, and I thought, oh no, somebody should have edited this. And then, but the dream is alive, the dream of the 90s is alive in Portland. I think that's great. Chamber wouldn't go along with it, but it's got the kind of chutzpah that's needed. Chutzpah.
Hi, my name is Seth Lungard. I'm a student here at UW. I'm an SUD major, a Sustainable Urban Development major.
Can you speak up, please? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm a student here at UW. I'm a Sustainable Urban Development major. I have a question for any and all of you. I'm not quite sure if urban branding works. I understand that understanding one's identity is pivotal to being able to create and accomplish an agenda, but I also believe identity is not self-described. Identity is construed from life experience and how those experiences resonate with others. Mr. Aaron Penn, you analogized Tacoma to a college freshman searching for an identity after leaving senior status in high school. I resent that. I can go to plenty of churches, barbershops, taverns, and work sites where you would find people that would respond overwhelmingly that Tacoma is a blue-collar town. We know who we are. I think it is on the community leaders to see this and respond with blue-collar sector growth initiatives. So my question to you all is, what would be a productive narrative that could attract more blue-collar jobs and or invigorate our current blue-collar community?
I wish I had a good answer for that. I think that the economic transitions that we are going through as a nation and globally pose some extraordinary challenges for cities, not only Tacoma, but around the country. And perhaps this is also why our role as a university and as a public university is so crucial to help to frame the reality of the income inequality and the changes that have taken place in economic sectors and the availability of jobs and resources. I don't have a quick and easy answer, and maybe my
Oh, for sure you were going to come up with the answer.
No, I think, I'm going to get myself in big trouble here, but I'm going to anyway. And I think that, the narrative around urban success is heavily driven by the elite places. San Francisco, New York City. You can even put Seattle into this category. And one of the things that distinguishes most of those places is that they have extraordinarily high-value captive industries. And, Wall Street's not going anywhere. And, thanks to Bernanke bucks, it spins off so much cash they can do a lot of things. And they've got so much money that money covers kind of a multitude of sins, I think, in their urban policy. And a lot of times urbanist dialogue is dominated by the values that emanate from those places. And when that type of policy collides with a place that has no leverage in the marketplace, because it's more of a commodity play, if you will, or has less of these fortress industries and fortress wealth that's not going anywhere, it can really put these communities at a disadvantage. And so I think you got to look at kind of what's the message, okay? Isn't Tacoma the one that just had a $15 an hour minimum wage? And I think when you look at something like that, in the grand scheme of things from a business perspective, is that a big deal? No. But I think you need to look at, can Tacoma say we're going to have the same sort of, very, very progressive policies that come from a San Francisco, a Seattle, or a Vancouver that are in a very different economically competitive situation. So I think we need to look at that. I think you need to look at the segmentation. There's a place up here, Port Townsend, that's doing some very innovative things around the maritime industry and the boat making. They're trying to integrate that into the schools. Don't know how successful the new schools chief's going to be up there, but really trying to get high school students involved in everything maritime and to teach the skills like the 3D modeling needed for the boat building to put the pipeline of skills in there. So I think there's a part of making sure that you're not negatively impacting your business climate, while also doing things like around the skills. We hear about the skills gap. What do you do to kind of bring it there, and segmenting the industries that you think you can realistically compete at? Kind of a customer segmentation analysis. At a high level, that's how I would approach it. I can send you a couple case studies if you'd like from other cities and what they're doing.
I'll say one quick word, I guess. I certainly don't have an answer really to the question, but what you made me think about is the need to redefine what we mean by the, quote, creative class. I don't know about you, but I grow very tired about hearing about the creative class. I don't know what the hell it really means. But when I use it, I think of people like craftspeople who are very skilled at doing glassworks or doing other things that involve their hands and mind. And so I think it'd be very helpful to kind of rethink who we put into this category called the creative class, and try to respond to their needs to express that creativity.
I'd like to give a thanks to the panel, and I think another image is going to come up. So this morning, your 2 minutes, your words, this is the cloud that was created with the words that you, the 3 words that you all turned in, and you could see by the scale of the word how frequently it was mentioned. But I want to reiterate something. These are the words that you used to describe Tacoma, you 300 people sitting in the room. And we've had a lot of conversation about inclusivity and who's not here. So I don't know right now how this cloud would change if we brought it out into neighborhoods, if we brought it to kids, if we brought it to senior centers. But think about that. What I hope you'll do as you get the lunch, I'm sure you're all starving. Lunch is actually going to be ready. Perhaps at your table, you might give a little bit of conversation. Maybe this can spur some conversation on whether this is what you thought it would look like, whether these are the kind of words you think are really appropriate to describe Tacoma. And also think about what words are missing and what those other voices would bring to this analysis of how you describe Tacoma.